Hey everyone, and welcome back. And I am so excited to kick off on this wonderful Wednesday with the fabulous Lisa Glanz. Hey Lisa.
Hey everyone. Hey Tom. Nice to be here again.
I'm really excited for this session, Lisa, because we've done a few sessions with you over the last 6 months or so, but I know Illustrator is kind of your foundation of so much of what you do. You know, you're a real pro in Illustrator, and I think maybe not enough people realize that. So today we're going to geek out on that particular platform, right?
Yes, and I'm hoping, obviously the workflows that I'm going to be showing you are kind of very key to my workflow and what I do in Illustrator. But so if there isn't anything really that's exactly what you would be using, I'm hoping that I'm going to show you ways that you can kind of like modify it for your process. So yeah,
perfect.
Yeah, hopefully it'll help either way.
Awesome.
Okay. So yeah, as I mentioned, obviously I'm going to be talking about stuff that I use a lot, and but there are kind of things that are key to anybody working in Illustrator, and also there might be things that you know, might be things you don't know. So yeah, either way, I hope you find this useful. So the first thing I want to discuss, Tom, and I know that this is like a big thing for you as well, is learning the shortcuts. And I know a lot of people are going to groan and moan about that, but honestly, it's the key to speeding up your workflow, like 100%. So the best way to do that, the best advice I can give you if you're new to Illustrator, even if you're not new and you haven't kind of taken the plunge to learn the shortcuts, is pick one. I would say pick one a day. And I'd start with the tools. So start with learning what the shortcuts are for the tools that you use the most, and literally pick one a day and prevent yourself from using that tool without hitting the keyboard shortcut on your keyboard. So that sounds like you will probably slow down for that day because you kind of like have to really concentrate on using the keyboard shortcut. But by the end of the day, you'll be proficient and it'll become kind of second nature. So
and it's an investment, right? Because you're going to save so much time over the coming years.
I mean, I can't explain to you how much time it saves me. So I really do think it is worth that very sort of painful beginning phase. It really is worth putting in the effort. Okay, so then, yeah, I hope this is going to be helpful because, you know, maybe sometimes people don't actually even know you can do certain things in Illustrator and they've been using for so long. Okay, so the first thing that I recommend doing is, speaking of shortcuts, is actually assigning a keyboard shortcut to tools and panels and kind of menu items that you use a lot in Illustrator. For example, I use the kind of resize, sorry, just took a while there. I use the resize tool, the scale tool, a lot in Illustrator. So I have a keyboard shortcut for that, which is F1. And that isn't standard. It doesn't come standard in Illustrator. So I actually set that up for myself. And I'm going to show you exactly how to do that. So coming over to your edit menu and down to keyboard shortcuts. Yours is probably going to say Illustrator defaults. The reason why you'll see my name there because I've created one for myself. And if we go ahead and actually do what I, set up the tool that I'm currently just kind of demoed, we go to the menu command and we're going to basically locate that menu that we want to assign a keyboard shortcut to. So that would be under object and then transform. And then you'll see I've got scale. So you'll see that keyboard shortcut's been assigned. So if I use reflect a lot, for example, I would hit that and then say choose, I don't know, F2 for that. And what's going to happen is if there's a conflict, it's going to tell you that there's a conflict. In other words, Illustrator is using that somewhere else. So you can decide whether that's important for you to keep or you kind of want to override that. It's entirely up to you. For example, I've got Command 2 on my keyboard for my layers panel, and that was, kind of assigned to something else, and I was happy to kind of lose that. So yeah, basically you can assign whatever you want, and then once you're happy, you can go ahead and choose the little sort of save icon and name your keyboard shortcuts, and then save. So that's like a really that's a super quick way to kind of speed up a workflow that's specific to you. So that's really nice. And then the other important thing that you should also really start getting used to and taking advantage of is setting up your workspace that's specific to your needs. And you can see I've actually got my layers panel on the left-hand side because I use that all the time. And I really don't like having it coming out here all the time because it kind of covers my swatches or whatever else I'm working on. So I've literally dragged that to the side and it just basically docks with my tool. And as I said, I've got a keyboard shortcut for that. And I just kind of use that every time I want to, bring that up. So if you are happy with the workspace, you've kind of set it up, you've moved your panels around, everything's perfect, I would recommend saving that workspace. So in order to do that, you just come over to Window, and then under Workspace, you're just going to basically choose New Workspace, and then name it, and then hit Enter, and it'll be there every time you load Illustrator. So if for whatever reason somebody else uses your computer or you sharing computers, you can just literally choose it under the workspace menu. It'll pop up here, which is super handy. So yeah, especially handy for, kind of offices that use the same computer a lot.
And Lisa and I actually talked about this on the Honest Designers Show podcast, where you get the real pros, especially people that are doing things like editing and even people in film and so on, use shortcuts very prolifically. And when you see the real pros working, they realize, time is money, and they're barely using their mouse. They're basically just speed typing on the keyboard the whole time, but it's all shortcuts and it's just incredibly efficient. It's pretty miraculous to look at.
Yeah, no, it is. Absolutely. Okay, so the toolbar is another thing to kind of get used to, and also something you can set up to suit your workflow. So if you come right to the bottom, you'll see those three little dots. You can literally drag and drop tools off the toolbar. That obviously comes standard with Illustrator. If you don't want so many, you don't use so many, you might want it cleaner and shorter and neater, whatever, kind of tickles your fancy. So that's a really nice thing to remember. And a lot of people don't know the keyboard shortcut or even know that there is that option, but Illustrator allows you to kind of get rid of your menus quite quickly by just pressing F on your keyboard. And this is super handy if you're presenting work to people. And there's also a really nice presentation mode that kind of clears everything and just kind of, takes... just basically shows your page that you're working on. So if you are, you've got a client hanging over your shoulder, which we all really love, this would be a great way to kind of showcase what you're explaining. Okay, so to come out of that, you just press Escape. And what I recommend, as I said right at the beginning, is kind of getting to know the keyboard shortcuts for the tools, because that, as you said, Tom, often what happens is if you get so proficient, you don't even have to move your mouse to activate stuff, which is pretty handy. So under each tool that has options, a really nice trick to remember is if you want to bring up, for example, you want to bring up some options for the warp tool, you're just going to hit Enter on your keyboard. Yeah, so just to go over that again. So any tool, as I said, that has options available, instead of double clicking on the tool, which means you kind of have to move your mouse all the way to the tool to activate it, you're just literally going to hit Enter on your keyboard, and that brings up the options for that tool, which is super handy. So if I was in the Direct Select tool and I wanted to activate the warp tool and bring up the function straight away, I would literally just Shift R to select the tool and hit Enter on my keyboard, and it's all there. So I really highly recommend getting used to, as I said, the keyboard shortcuts, because that's going to speed you up quite a bit. And then I think a lot of people aren't aware that some tools, especially kind of like the drawing tools like the star and the rounded corners, as you're drawing them, you've got kind of quite a few options. I definitely recommend experimenting and finding stuff out, because Illustrator has built in a whole lot of stuff that's kind of secret, if I can call it that. And the only way really to discover everything that's available is to experiment. So I'm holding down my mouse as I'm drawing that, but if I wanted to actually increase or decrease the amount of stars sort of coming out, I'm literally just using my arrows on my keyboard as I'm drawing. So that saves so much time instead of going.
Is that while you're holding down still?
Yes. Yeah, so I've still got it. I'm still holding it down. I haven't let go of my mouse as I drew it, and I'm literally just pressing the arrow up and down. And the other nice thing is if you hold down Command, you can actually change kind of size of that star, or whatever you want to call it, the spike. So there's a whole bunch of things that, as I said, Illustrator builds into us using our keyboard to save us time. So definitely experiment, because that's kind of how you're going to figure stuff out. And the same for the rounded corners tool. And I know a lot of us use this quite a bit. So as I'm drawing and I haven't let go yet, I'm literally just using the arrows, and that's going to change the corners to be kind of more round or not so round. Mm-hmm. So that's pretty cool trick as well. And then if we're drawing and we want things to be precision from the center out, you're just literally going to use the Option key on your keyboard. So that automatically draws the shape from the center outwards, as opposed to from the corner down. So that also saves you quite a bit of time. And I think a lot of people also kind of don't realize that you can, well, I suppose this is more of a beginner thing, but you can literally, if we have our smart guides on, you could literally tell it to kind of draw from that kind of angle, click once, and then you just type in your amount, and it's a perfect square or whatever it is that you've kind of typed in. So that also saves you a lot of time. Instead of kind of figuring it out or trying to draw it perfectly, you do it all in one step. And the other thing I wanted to mention was if the tool has more than one tool behind it, I probably didn't say that very well. So in the rectangle, yeah, in the rectangle tool, for example, there's an ellipse, there's a star, whatever. So if we want to kind of activate those, we're just going to hold down our Option key on our keyboards, and we're just going to click through to kind of cycle through what's available. So that's pretty handy, instead of trying to get this little arrow thing to come out and kind of operate for us, which doesn't always work, and it's frustrating. So that's that's a really nice, handy way to see what's available.
That is handy.
There's a couple of tools that I use all the time in my work that I think a lot of people don't necessarily take advantage of, and I'm going to show you some later on. I'm going to show you some examples how I actually use them in my work, but I just quickly want to run through some of them. I'm sure you guys use the eyedropper tool, but some people don't actually know that you can use the eyedropper tool to also copy kind of text attributes. So for example, if I wanted that text to be the same as Toolbar, for example, I would just use the eyedropper tool, and it's going to choose exactly the same text, the same color, everything. So it basically copies the attributes, and that's a super quick, cool thing to use. So it's not only for color, and I think kind of a lot of people don't really realize that. Okay, the other really super handy tool that I use is the Magic Wand tool. So if we were to, trying to think of an example. Okay, so if I had a whole bunch of objects all over the place that were various colors, and so let's just do that. And I wanted to quickly delete all the colors that were green, or I wanted to change all the colors that were green, for example, I would literally just use my Magic Wand, and it's gonna, sorry, I've probably got, oh, that's why it's locked. That's the other important thing. Obviously, if it's locked, it's not going to select that. So yeah, I would literally use my Magic Wand tool, and it would select everything of the same color or shape. Actually, it's not shape. You can do that differently, but basically the same color. So that's pretty handy. And that's specifically handy to surface pattern designers. So often we, kind of creating, and we quickly want to see what something looks like, in a different color. That's a nice, handy way of doing that. And the other tool that I use all the time is the warp tool and the puppet tool, and that I'm going to show you how exactly I use that. Okay, so the warp tool and the puppet tool are like, I don't know, to me, I think they're like miracle tools. They literally save me so much time and effort and hours of work, and I'm going to show you exactly how I use them, and hopefully it's going to do the same for you. Okay, so this is just one of the characters for my portrait creator, and a lot of people actually ask me, how can I change the shape of his head or make him a little bit buffier or whatever. So this is a great way to do that. So it's a good example to show you how you can use the warp tool for that. So I'm going to activate the warp tool, which is Shift R on my keyboard. I'm going to hit enter because I want to make sure that detail and simplify are off. If we had that on, every time you use the tool, it's going to basically simplify the path, and we don't want to do that because we want to keep that kind of sketchy nature to this particular drawing. Okay, so to resize, you'll see the brush is quite large. To resize that, I'm just going to hold Option on my keyboard, and to keep it a circle, I'm going to hold down Shift. So that's going to basically keep it a circle. And if I didn't have Shift and it ended up looking something like that, and you realize, oh, that looks terrible, we're just going to hit enter on the keyboard and make that a circle again. Okay, so I'm going to hide all those kind of edges and nodes so we can see what's going on. So that's Command H on my keyboard. And I want to make his hips a little wider. So what's important about the warp tool, depending on what you're trying to do, you need to be subtle and kind of tease the area, because obviously the wilder you are, the more chances that things can go wrong. So I literally just very gently start teasing out areas. I see that's back on that. I start teasing out, it's just subtly teasing out areas to change the shape.
I'm glad you're making his hips bigger. The rest of us are starting to feel bad, Lisa.
Well, I was going to use a woman, but then I thought maybe us women would feel hard done by. So it's the guy's turn. So that's pretty handy. And yeah, you can go subtle, you can go much bigger. It's entirely up to you. And the same thing would apply, for example, changing the shape of the guy's head. And so instead of us like redrawing areas, we are literally just manipulating, them to kind of suit what we want. Okay, he looks a little alien, but you kind of get the idea. So that's a super handy tool that I use all the time in my work. And I'm going to show you later on how we can use that in a different application. So the other tool that's really nice, especially for people who illustrate a lot and maybe you want variations of a particular thing. And this is also super handy if you're kind of setting up animation. It's also a really nice tool to use. And the puppet tool is fantastic for that. So I'm just going to make a duplicate of these because I want you to see how we've changed them. So I'm just going to move those there. And bringing up the puppet tool. It takes a while because basically Illustrator builds a framework for your illustration. So depending on how slow your machine is like mine. Okay, so this looks scary, but it's not. So don't be intimidated by it. All it's doing is it's just basically making a framework for you to choose. So where the pins are, these little black dots, that basically means that area isn't going to move. And everything else that doesn't have a pin will be influenced by the movement. So be aware of that because that's actually how you're going to determine where you want things to not move. So if I pin something there, basically this area isn't going to move. And the goal of this thing is to actually move his trunk that is kind of like, his trunk kind of going upwards. And that's going to save me time instead of redrawing the whole elephant again to have that trunk moving. So I'm just going to quickly show you how easy that really is just by doing that. Okay. But if you want it more, yeah, if you want it a little bit more realistically and you want to be a bit more careful, so you want to basically just pin things where you don't want them to move. So I don't want that part to move. and probably something like that. And I actually want to get rid of that pin. So I've just selected it. I'm just deleting that. And now we're just going to swing his trunk up. And probably, oops. Yeah, you need to be careful because every time you pin a new pin, Illustrator does its thing. So you need to be careful. We can fix that area with the warp tool, which is why the warp tool is so cool. And I probably just want his ear just moved slightly. And we can even do the same for his tail. And I'm coming out of that by just pressing V and using my warp tool. I'm just going to adjust that. And what we could do now is change his eye. And drawing that.
Are you playing more with animation at the minute? I think this little fellow would be so cute animated.
Yeah. I must say it is on my list this year to actually get into it, but I'm kind of scared of it. But I need to find ways to do it more in Illustrator because that's where I feel more comfortable. So yeah, it's definitely on my list. So that's like a quick way. I want to show you the bird as well because you'll see how easy it is to literally change something without having to redraw. As I said, especially for animation, it's super handy. So if we just bring the other two back, you'll see how different they are. And we didn't have to redraw that. So that's a super cool thing to remember.
That's amazing, Lisa. I feel like on the second elephant, he's got a real kind of smirk. It's great character capture there. Okay,
so the layers panel is literally like I use it all the time, hence why it's on the left-hand side. It's almost like sometimes I don't even touch elements on the artboard. I sometimes just literally do everything from the layers panel. And I know a lot of people kind of get lazy with that and they don't want to rename their layers and that kind of thing. You don't have to like go ballistic about that, but if you can get used to using your layers panel and getting used to naming things, I promise you it's going to save you literally hours and hours, especially if you're using the same file over and over. Because things can get quite scary and hectic, like if you're using a lot of elements in a file. So that would be a really good habit to get into. So I'm going to show you exactly how beneficial that is. Obviously, a lot of you know that the layers panel, you know, how it works. So I'm going to skip the basics of it because of our type of people that are watching. So I'm just going to dive straight into how I literally use it all the time in my work. So the nice thing about the layers panel, as I'm sure you guys know, you can select anything directly from the layers panel. And if you're looking for something specifically and you don't know where it is in your layers panel, I use the sort of magnifying glass, the locate object. So that takes me to, if I hit that, it takes me exactly where it is in the layers panel. So for example, if I wanted to adjust his cheek, and I didn't want to go into isolation mode because it's like click and then double click and then double click. I would literally just expand that in the layers panel and I would locate the cheek that I wanted to change, come over to, you know, my swatches panel and change the color. And literally didn't have to touch anything on the artboard. So that is a huge time saver for me. And I literally don't, as I said, don't even sometimes spend like I'll spend like 10 minutes not even touching anything, yeah. And I'm literally working in the layers panel. So another great way to do that as well is if you are on one layer, actually let's do that. If I have text on this layer, and let's make it that. and we wanted to copy text that was on a different layer, you could literally expose that layer and select the text on the other layer without even having it, kind of in view. Use your eyedropper tool and select the text that you want to change it to, turn that off, and it's changed it. So you instead of like fumbling your way through kind of objects and groups and that kind of thing, I highly recommend that you get used to using the layers panel more regularly in your work, and especially naming the layers. That's super important. And another cool trick that some of you may not know about the layers panel, it's really cool if you're using clipping masks a lot. And I do use clipping masks a lot in my work, especially for making like preview images for my products. So for example, if we wanted to change this little house illustration to the bear, I would simply just drag it, activate my layers panel. Okay, so we can see where bear is. And I want to locate that. So there it is. There's the clipping mask. So you'll notice I'm not touching bear at all with my mouse. I'm just using the layers panel. I'm just going to simply drag and drop that below the actual clipping mask. And it's basically clipped it to our drawing. And then I can go ahead and delete that little house. And we haven't even touched anything. We haven't like had to unclip it and then reclip it. And yeah, so that's a super handy way of dealing with clipping masks, especially if you want to change items. And that's specifically handy if you've like kind of got like a really neat layout, you've done everything, everything's in place, and you just don't want to go to the trouble of sort of unmasking things and remasking them, especially if you have shadows and things like that. So definitely take advantage of your layers panel. I promise you, you will thank yourself for that. Okay, so actions, we all know we can create actions, use actions in our work, but a lot of people get intimidated by them, and they also don't really know how to apply it in their work. But literally, you can apply an action or create an action for anything. Well, I don't want to say anything. There are limitations, but just about anything. So I'll give you an example of how I use actions, and they're pretty simple. They don't have to be complicated, and they're really easy to make. So the actions that I use a lot in my work are creating a compound path and then expanding that. So instead of us, let's do that. Let's draw two objects. Instead of me selecting that, coming over to my Pathfinder, choosing compound path and then expand, I've got a shortcut, well, action that I created for that. And I use that a lot in my work, especially when I import drawings, and I'm going to show you exactly what I mean. So I kind of drew that, scanned it, imported it, etc. And what happens is you end up with a whole bunch of little kind of nodes and paths and a whole lot of hectic things going on. I actually want to make that into one compound shape. And the quickest way to do that is to hit, for me, I made a shortcut for that. So it's Command F1 on my keyboard, and that does everything for me. So I'm going to show you exactly how to make an action that I promise you is not as intimidating as you think. So coming over to, let's do the same action that I've got. So if we had to draw two items, I'm going to come over to my flyout menu and just choose new action. Let's call it compound, test. And I'm going to hit record. Okay, so I'm gonna come clean here. Originally, when I first started using actions, I thought, oh my goodness, it's going to record every single thing I do, but that's not the case. So what it does is it only starts recording when you actually start using a menu item or kind of a panel sort of function. So don't worry if you like moving stuff around or whatever. Okay, in that case, it did record that. So take that back. But what I'm saying is it doesn't matter whatever you do, you can always delete what you have done that accidentally done. And so don't get overwhelmed by that. So I'm going to come over to my Pathfinder, and then I'm going to choose Make Compound Shape. And then I'm going to hit Expand, and then come back to my action panel and then hit the Stop button. So you'll see it's got our move action that I accidentally did. We don't want that. So I'm just literally going to delete that. And what you can do is you can now assign a keyboard shortcut. So let's do that. It's under action options. And here you can choose your keyboard shortcuts. You can say Shift or Command, whatever suits you. I'm not going to assign one because I've got a lot of keyboard shortcuts, so I don't want to cause complications. Okay, so it's super easy. It's not as intimidating as you think. So seriously, do get used to making actions for yourself, especially specifically to your work. And also, don't be afraid of making an action for a particular project. So if you are working on a project that requires the same thing for you to do over and over, but you're probably never going to use it again, that's okay. Make that action. It's going to take you like literally 1 minute, and you just use that action in for that project, and then you can delete it if you want. So yeah, definitely use that in your workflow. And then another cool thing that I recommend is look through the default actions, because there might be some there that you will use in your work for sure. And the one that I definitely use is the delete unused panel. And let me just bring up my swatches panel. So I've assigned a keyboard shortcut to that because I use it so much. It's F5, which I'm going to hit now. And what it's going to do is you'll see it deleted all the colors that I don't use. And that is super great for preparing artwork for clients or preparing a file to sell. It literally gets rid of all the stuff that you don't use. And when the customer or client opens that file, everything's neat. It doesn't have stuff that they don't need and stuff that's confusing. So definitely take advantage of that action.
You're a more organized person than I am, Lisa. I've said that
Really?
before. Yeah, I love how you kind of keep all these things nice and tidy.
Oh, yeah. I must say, I don't know why, because my office and my bedroom are not very tidy, so I don't know how that happened. Yeah, so the image trace, I'm sure you guys use in your work a lot. It's something that I use in my work all the time. And if you haven't yet, I highly recommend that you start saving presets for your imaging, your image tracing. So I don't know if you know how to do that, but I'm going to show you anyway in case you don't. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull in 2 things that I want to trace. So what I did for this was I basically took a snapshot, a screenshot of this little van. I brought it into Procreate, and then I used some of my brushes just to create some shadow work. And then I basically exported those JPEGs, and I'm going to bring them into Illustrator. So let me just locate them. Oh, that wasn't very clever. Sorry, guys. I thought I had that up.
Look at that folder organization, people.
Okay, so I'm literally just dragging those 2 JPEGs that I exported from Procreate, and I've dropped them into my Illustrator file. I'm just going to pull them next to each other. Okay, so you'll see, obviously you're going to see here that there's now kind of like the makings of the van. So this is shadow work that I want to apply to the van. And the reason why I used Procreate instead of, for example, say Procreate Illustrator brushes is that for me personally, I work way faster in Procreate to kind of sketch. So that's a really handy way of getting texture work into Illustrator without fussing over Illustrator brushes. Okay, so with that selected and my image trace up, we're going to start with the default. Although I have so many kind of presets that I've saved for exactly this purpose, I'm going to kind of act as if this is the first time I'm doing it because I want to show you how to save that. So we're going to start with the default. I'm going to work with black and white. We definitely, I'm just going to expand the advanced. We definitely want to make sure that we ignore white because we don't want Illustrator to actually trace that white area. We're only interested in the black. And we're going to just hit trace to see what's happening and see if that's kind of anything near to the results that we want. So I want to retain as much grunginess and effects as possible. Okay, so we're on grayscale. I don't know why I did that. It needs to hop back to black and white. Okay, so that's not enough of detail. So I'm going to bring my noise right down to 1. And my path, you could even go 100%, but let's see what that does. And you'll see it's starting to kind of really pick up all those little grungy bits and retain all that sort of texture in our work, which is what we want. I just want a dash more. Okay, so that's starting to look good. I'm going to leave it there and then just hit expand. Oh, but before I do that, I need to show you how to save that preset. Okay, so we're going to come to this little sort of 3 hamburger fly menu. And we're just literally going to go save as new preset. I'm going to call it van. And what's going to happen is the next time, let me just hit expand, sorry. And then the next time we want to trace again, it should be there in your menu. And you'll see there it is right at the bottom. So I'm going to choose van as my starting point. And that's not bad. I just want to maybe take it down a dash. So the threshold is basically going to tell it how much black I want it to pick up. That looks about right. I'm going to hit expand. Okay. So let's start putting some of the things we learned into action. I'm going to bring that down to the layer that I'm working on, which is tip 6. So I'm literally just dragging and dropping. I'm going to resize that. I want to, remember we discussed compound paths and shapes and groups and things like that. So coming over to my layers panel, you'll see if we expand that, that is just an insane amount of paths. And for me, that's a nightmare. And I want to keep things neat. I also want to keep the file size down. So there's 2 ways to keep your file size down. One is to make that compound path, because then we're going to get rid of all those extra little paths that we don't want. And another way of doing it is to simplify your path, but we still want to keep that sort of grungy look. So coming over to the object, and we're going to hit simplify. Again, if you're using this a lot, you can assign a keyboard shortcut to that. And you'll see over here, the original is, there's like 22,000 points. And just by doing that, we brought it right down to 9,700, which is good. That's good going. So I'm not going to touch that, and I'm just going to hit OK. So we already helped Illustrator and the file size down quite a bit. And because I have a keyboard shortcut for this, I'm going to make a compound shape out of this kind of shadow work. So my keyboard shortcut is Command F2. And it's probably going to tell me the object's quite complex. No problem. Oh, what I probably did was choose the wrong things. So it literally is, my keyboard shortcut is Command F1, not F2, because that's for something else. So that basically has made it a compound shape, and you'll see we don't have all those paths anymore. So I could go ahead and name that. And we can also now very quickly change it into a shadow, probably something like that. It's starting to look like something. So I want to do the same.
That looks cool.
Yeah, so I want to do the same for the shadow that's kind of underneath the car. And you'll see I've got 2 sort of blobs areas here, which I want to separate. And I want each of them to be a compound shape. So I'm going to go into them, isolation mode, by double clicking. And using my lasso tool, which is Q on my keyboard, and shortcut to make a compound path. This time, make sure I use the right shortcut. And you'll see we've now got 2 shapes instead of a whole bunch of paths. So I'm not going to bother naming that. And we can safely ungroup that now, because they're not going to be all these tiny little nodes. And I want to make that the same shadow color as the sort of van color. Hitting eyedropper tool, and I'm just going to select that. And the same for that one. But now we need to reorder things. So I'm just literally going to drag that to the bottom. And this guy, I actually want under each sort of tire.
Yeah, I wonder about that. So you're going for like a more intense shadow in those spots?
Yeah. So I'm going to, again, make that a compound path, only because I'm like that. You don't have to do all that stuff. And then I'm just going to move that below. So instead of us faffing and fiddling, trying to kind of like center back and figure out where they are, I've literally used my layers panel to do all that work. And if I wanted to kind of select everything at once, that's also very easy to do. I'm just holding down my shift key and grouping those things together. And we didn't have to fuss over trying to select them on the artboard. So that's pretty handy. So here you'll see things are slightly off. If I kind of select that, you'll see they're just a little bit off. I'm going to use my warp tool, which is why I love that tool so much. And I'm literally going to just tease those things into place. So even if you bring in work and you're not entirely happy with the placement, your warp tool is going to be your friend. Okay, so another kind of tool that I use all the time, which you saw me use earlier on, is the lasso tool. I also have a keyboard shortcut for removing points on the path instead of deleting them, and I'll explain exactly why. So if I went into this and I literally wanted to get rid of those things and I hit delete, what's going to happen, it's kind of leaves those nodes there which we don't want. So I have the option of, if I go to path and it's a remove anchor points, what that does, it leaves the actual, let's just show you. It leaves the path intact. It still closes the path, but it literally is just removing those anchor points. So we don't want an open path. We still want to keep a closed path, but we want to remove those kind of nodes, and that's a good way of doing that. So my keyboard shortcut, if I can remember correctly. Okay, so where were we? We were using
you were selecting
yes.
the pick a group.
Yeah. Okay, so if we wanted to, as I said, if we just wanted to remove those anchor points, we would just literally do that. And that's a really handy way of getting rid of all those things, but we still have closed paths, which is exactly what we want. So that's a really nice, handy tip for working with really detailed and a lot of nodes going on in your work. I come out of isolation mode. Okay, so the last thing I want to do is create a clipping mask for this shadow work, because you'll see it's kind of hanging over the car, and I don't necessarily want that. So using my layers panel again, I'm going to select this entire sort of car, and I'm going to just drag, using the Option key on my keyboard, I'm just going to drag above that, and that makes a duplicate. We're going to turn that into a compound path. I've just used my keyboard shortcut. And remove, I don't know why the keyboard shortcut isn't working for that, but we'll just do that. Oh. Don't do what I did. Okay, so we're literally just removing anchor points, and we're going to use the blob tool just to cover things up. Okay, so this guy, I'm just literally using my blob tool to get rid of, the extra bits. And making sure that I don't have any weird stuff going on. Okay, so we have a compound path now of the entire van. I'm just going to bring it down and select all those. We are looking for the shadow, which is at the top. And I'm just going to paste that inside. It's going to tell you that there's a whole lot of stuff going on because it's quite a complex path, and that's absolutely fine. And all I did was I clipped that. So now that shadow is sitting snugly inside the van. And I'm just going to move that to below the line work because I want that part of the van. So yeah, I hope that kind of showed how you can use the layers panel to help you work through tricky kind of stuff.
Amazing. And that van looks so good. The depth on it is incredible.
Yeah, so just adding that extra little bit of depth and shadow work, and using Procreate, or you can even use Photoshop. You can do the same thing in Photoshop and bring that in to kind of create that texture. So it really is helpful for those kind of work. And yeah, keyboard shortcuts are going to help you get
Amazing.
there quicker. Okay, so another thing that just to illustrate how you can put these kind of things to practice, because it's all very well showing you in theory, but yeah, it's a good idea to show you how to use it in your workflow. So this is a really handy trick, especially for people using designing surface pattern design, especially if you're preparing it for like, I don't know, the stock library things. Often they want the design to be clipped and they want it to be clean. They don't want stuff to even be kind of sitting in a clipping mask. So yeah, you would need to basically trim everything in order to do that. And I'm going to show you, because I have that keyboard shortcut set up, I'm going to show you the long way, and then I'm going to show you what it looks like if you don't have the keyboard, or if you do have it kind of set up. Okay, so first thing we want to do is clip all the artwork inside of our pattern. So I'm going to use the rectangle that's sitting on my background layer. I'm just literally going to drag and hold down my Option key. So I've made a duplicate. I'm going to select that entire layer by hitting that same little sort of selection tool. And then we're going to clip inside. Coming over to my Pathfinder, we are going to basically use the crop tool, yeah, and then make a duplicate of this guy again. Come over to the swatches, because as you know, Illustrator needs a kind of bounding box underneath the pattern to sort of set that pattern. So yeah, it needs to be empty in order for Illustrator to know where that pattern begins and ends. And we're just literally going to select everything, and we're going to drag and drop and test it, and it's all good. And the nice thing is we can now kind of group each thing if we wanted to. So that's where the magic wand comes in. If we wanted to actually group all of these sort of individual elements for sort of layering. Often clients will want, for example, a Photoshop document of these things, each on their own layer. This would be a good way to kind of group it all on their own layer by using the Magic Wand tool. So that's a handy trick. And then you might find that because you've cropped, you might find that you've created kind of empty shapes. And that's quite a common thing that happens in the Pathfinder tool. So in order to find them, the quickest way to do that, we're going to draw an empty shape using our Magic Wand tool. We're going to select that empty shape, and then you'll see it's kind of found all those little empty shapes in the artwork that we don't want, and I'm just literally going to delete that. So that's a quick and easy way to kind of clean up your artwork as well. So I'm just going to revert that and show you how we can do the same thing, but because I've got keyboard shortcuts, it's going to be much quicker.
Stuart said, okay, now that is very clever.
Okay, so I did the same thing that I just showed you, but with my keyboard shortcuts. So that was much quicker. Yeah, so I hope that shows you how you can actually apply these things in your work and not just theory. Yeah, and as I said, start setting them up to actually kind of suit what you need and what you need to do for things to work in your workflow. I hope that was sort of helpful.
That was beyond helpful. That was amazing. Thank you so much, Lisa. And let's give it up for Lisa in the chat. As always, you massively over-delivered. So thank you.
Oh, I hope so. I hope it wasn't too boring for those advanced people. I hope you learned something.
No, I think you really got the balance down right. You kind of skipped over a few of the real novice things, but kind of, yeah. Lisa, thank you again. And I can't wait to see you next week. Take care. Bye.
Bye.